I stood at the head of the boardroom table, fingers resting lightly on the polished mahogany surface, watching my family filter in through the glass doors. They didn't recognize me at first, not in this tailored Armani suit, not with my hair swept back in a sleek bun, not surrounded by lawyers and executives whose combined net worth could buy and sell their little empire 3 times over. My stepmother froze mid-step when our eyes met. The colour drained from her face like water circling a drain. Good. Let her remember every cruel word, every dismissive glance. Let her remember the daughter she threw away, like yesterday's trash. Because today, I was about to take everything she'd spent 20 years building on my father's grave. "Please, sit," I said, my voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that comes from owning rooms like this in 12 different countries. "We have a lot to discuss about the future of Montgomery Holdings." It started the way these things always do, with love that wasn't really love, and family that was never really family. When I was 7 years old, my mother died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday evening. She'd been coming home from my piano recital, still humming the Chopin piece I'd played. The police said she didn't suffer. I didn't believe them then. I don't believe them now. What I do believe is that her death created a vacuum in our lives, and my father, weak, grieving, desperate, let the wrong woman fill it. Victoria swept into our lives 6 months later with the kind of calculated grace that should have raised red flags. She was beautiful in that sharp, maintained way. Blonde hair that never moved, nails that never chipped, a smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. She brought with her 2 children from her previous marriage, Diane, who was my age, and Trevor, who was 2 years older. My father, drowning in his grief and loneliness, married her within a year. I was 8 when I became invisible in my own home. It wasn't dramatic at first, small things. My birthday party cancelled because Diane had a recital. My college fund temporarily borrowed for Trevor's private school tuition. My mother's jewellery, pieces she'd left specifically for me in her will, mysteriously appearing on Victoria's dresser. When I asked about it, my father would sigh and say, "Lana, Victoria is your mother now. What's hers is yours, and what's yours is hers. That's what family means." Except it never worked both ways. By the time I was 12, the pattern was clear. Diane got piano lessons while I was told we couldn't afford them. Trevor got a new car for his 16th birthday, while I was told character was built through taking the bus. When I won a scholarship to a prestigious summer program for young entrepreneurs, Victoria convinced my father I was too young to go alone, and the spot was given to Diane instead. Diane, who spent the entire summer complaining about how boring business was. My father died when I was 17. Heart attack. Sudden, final, devastating. I found out at school, pulled from AP calculus by a grim-faced counsellor. By the time I got home, Victoria had already been to the lawyer's office. She sat me down at the kitchen table, that same table where my mother used to help me with homework, and explained my new reality, with the warmth of someone reading a phone book. "Your father left the company to me," she said, not even pretending to be sad. "He wanted to make sure the family business stayed in capable hands. You'll receive a trust when you turn 25, provided you meet certain conditions. Until then, I am your legal guardian." "What conditions?" I asked, my voice small, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "Standard things. Maintaining a good relationship with the family, not causing trouble, respecting my decisions." Her smile was a knife wrapped in silk. "I'm sure you'll have no problem with that." The trust, I later discovered through a lawyer I could barely afford, was a pittance, barely enough to cover community college. The real money, the company my father and mother built together, the properties, the investments, all of it went to Victoria. And the conditions she'd mentioned? They were so vague, so subjective, that she could withhold the trust forever if she wanted. She wanted. My father's funeral was on a Tuesday. By Friday, my belongings were moved from my childhood bedroom. the room with the window seat where my mother used to read to me, to the smallest guest room in the attic. Victoria needed my room for her home office. The view was better, she said, more inspiring. I was 18 when I started working at Romano's, a small Italian restaurant downtown. I needed money for college applications, for food that wasn't carefully rationed, to make sure I appreciated the value of things, for a life beyond the walls of that house that had stopped being home the day my father married Victoria. The work was hard. My feet ached, my back screamed. I came home smelling like garlic and tomato sauce. But I liked it. The owner, Mr. Romano, was kind. He saw me, and he liked what he saw. "You're smart," he told me one evening after I'd reorganized his entire reservation system. "Too smart for this, but while you're here, you learn everything, yes? You watch how business works." I watched. I learned. I memorized. Victoria found out about the job when she saw me at the restaurant serving a table of her friends. I still remember the look on her face, disgust wrapped in something that looked almost like satisfaction. She'd been waiting for this moment, I realized. Waiting for proof that I was beneath her, beneath them, beneath the family name she'd married into. "Lana?" Her voice cut through the dinner chatter. "Is that you?" I balanced the tray of pasta dishes on my hip. "Hi, Victoria. What can I get you?" Her friends, women who'd been at my parents' wedding, who'd known me since I was a child, stared at me like I was something unfortunate they'd found on the bottom of their designer shoes. One of them, Patricia, actually gasped. "You're working here?" Victoria's tone suggested I was doing something far more scandalous than waitressing. "As a server?" "Yes." I set down the dishes, making sure my hands didn't shake. "The salmon looks good tonight. Can I get you started with drinks?" She didn't answer. She gathered her purse, stood up, and walked out. Her friends followed like baby ducks after their mother, leaving without ordering. I watched them go, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. Not sadness. Not anymore. Something sharper. Clearer. That night, I came home to find my belongings in boxes in the driveway. Victoria stood on the porch, backlit by the chandelier, my mother's chandelier, looking down at me like I was a problem finally being solved. "I can't have someone working in the service industry living under my roof," she said. "It reflects poorly on the family, on the company, on everything your father built." "My father built it with my mother," I said quietly. "This is my house too." "Was your house. You're 18 now, legally an adult. I've fulfilled my obligations to you. It's time you learned to stand on your own feet." She started to close the door, then paused. "Oh, and Lana, given your current circumstances, I think it's best if we part ways completely. The trust fund conditions included maintaining family dignity. This doesn't qualify. Consider it void." The door closed. The lock clicked. And I stood there in the driveway of my childhood home, surrounded by boxes of my life, understanding with perfect clarity that I was completely alone. What Victoria didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been preparing for this moment since I was 12 years old. I'd spent 6 years watching Victoria dismantle my life piece by piece, and I'd learned. I'd learned that anger without strategy is just noise, that tears without action are just water, that waiting for justice means you'll wait forever unless you create it yourself. When I was 12 and Victoria borrowed my first college fund, I opened a bank account my father didn't know about. I put every birthday check from distant relatives into it, every penny I earned from babysitting, from yard work, from tutoring. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and mine alone. When I was 14, and Victoria started grooming my father to leave everything to her, I started taking business courses online. Free ones at first, then cheap ones I could afford from my secret account. I learned about corporate structure, about investment strategies, about how companies were really run. I read every business book in the library. I memorized case studies. I taught myself accounting. When I was 16 and my father started having chest pains that Victoria dismissed as stress, I made copies of every important document in his office. Birth certificates, property deeds, business contracts, his original will, the one that left everything to me in trust, with my mother's sister as executor. I hid them in a safety deposit box Victoria didn't know existed. And when I was 17 and my father died and Victoria revealed her true nature completely, I'd already been planning my exit for 5 years. The night she threw me out, I didn't cry. I loaded my boxes into Mr. Romano's van. He'd come to help when I called. And I drove to the YMCA where I'd already arranged a room. It was small, the walls were thin, the shower water never got quite hot enough. But it was mine, paid for by my own work, and no one could take it from me. I slept better that night than I had in years. The next morning, I enrolled in community college. Full-time student by day, full-time waitress by night. I studied business administration, finance, and real estate management. My grades were perfect, not because I was naturally brilliant, but because I couldn't afford for them to be anything less. Every A was a step away from Victoria. Every completed credit was proof that I didn't need her, that I never had. Mr. Romano became more than a boss. He became a mentor, the kind of father figure my actual father had failed to be in those final years. He taught me everything about running a restaurant, not just the front of house smile and serve, but the real work. Inventory management, vendor negotiations, employee scheduling, profit margins, cost analysis. The restaurant business, it teaches you about people, he told me one evening after closing. You see them at their worst, hungry, tired, demanding. You learn to read them, to anticipate what they need before they know themselves. This skill, Lana, it works everywhere. Boardrooms, negotiations, life. I absorbed everything like a sponge soaking up water after a drought. But I also kept watching Victoria. I learned where she and Diane and Trevor ate lunch, what country clubs they joined, which restaurants they frequented for business dinners. I memorized their patterns the way a general studies enemy territory. Not for revenge, not yet. For understanding, for opportunity. When I was 19, Mr. Romano had a stroke. Mild, thankfully, but enough to scare him. Enough to make him think about retirement. He called me into his office on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Lana, I'm going to sell the restaurant, he said, and my heart dropped. This job, this place had been my salvation. But first, I want to offer it to you. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Mr. Romano, I'm a 19-year-old college student living at the Y. I don't have that kind of money. You don't need it, not all of it. He pushed a folder across his desk. I've talked to banks. With your grades, your work history, your business plan. Yes, I know about the business plan you've been working on. You think I don't notice these things? You can get a loan. I'll hold the note. For the rest, you pay me back over 10 years. Low interest, very reasonable. Why? I asked, because this was too generous, too perfect. Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what matters. Not just profit, though you'll make plenty of that, you're too smart not to, but dignity, respect, building something real. He smiled. And because I think you're going to do extraordinary things, Lana Montgomery, I want to be able to say I helped. I bought Romano's 3 weeks later. The bank loan, Miss Romano's seller financing, and every penny I'd saved since I was 12. I was 20 years old, still in college, and I owned a business. Victoria and her family had no idea. Why would they? They never asked about me. In their minds, I'd faded into irrelevance, an embarrassing footnote in their perfect story, a cautionary tale they probably told at parties about the importance of making something of yourself. I ran Romano's like my life depended on it, because it did. I worked 100-hour weeks. I showed up before dawn to meet vendors, stayed past midnight balancing books. I learned every position in that restaurant until I could step into any role seamlessly. I made mistakes, plenty of them, but I learned from each one, and I never made the same mistake twice. The restaurant turned a profit within 6 months, a real profit, not the accounting tricks kind. I reinvested every penny, new equipment, better ingredients, a renovated dining room. I poached a talented sous chef from a failing restaurant across town. I implemented a training program that turned good servers into great ones. I created an atmosphere that made people want to come back, and they did. Within 2 years, I owned 2 restaurants. The second one was a failing Mexican place that I got for a song. I gutted it, rebuilt it, and reopened it as something fresh and exciting. It was packed from opening night. I was 23 when I opened my 3rd restaurant, a high-end steakhouse in the business district. This one required serious capital, the kind of money I'd been carefully building through the profits from my other locations, through careful investments, through working with business partners who saw what I saw, potential. This was also when I started appearing on Victoria's radar again, though she didn't know it yet. I'd chosen the location carefully, 2 blocks from Montgomery Holdings' main office. I knew Victoria and Trevor did business lunches. I knew they liked to impress clients with expensive meals and prime location. I'd counted on their arrogance, their assumption that their world and mine would never intersect. They came to my steakhouse 6 months after it opened. I wasn't there that day. I'd learned the value of excellent managers, people I trusted to run things while I focused on expansion. But my head server called me. "Miss Montgomery, you said to let you know if anyone named Victoria or Trevor Montgomery made a reservation. They're here now. Party of 4, prime table, looks like a business dinner." I smiled, alone in my apartment, looking out at the city that had once seemed so impossible to conquer. Perfect. Comp their meal. Make sure the service is impeccable. And send me the bill. That was the beginning. They came back the next month, and the month after that. Each time I made sure they were treated like royalty. Each time I paid for their meals myself, an investment in the future. Each time they had no idea they were dining in an establishment owned by the girl they'd thrown away. By the time I was 25, I owned 7 restaurants, ranging from casual Italian to high-end fusion. My corporate structure was deliberately complex. LLCs within LLCs, holdings companies with purposefully vague names. Anyone doing surface-level research would never trace them back to me. That was intentional. I'd learned from Victoria's playbook. The best moves are the ones people don't see coming. I also started buying property. Small commercial buildings at first, in neighbourhoods I could see were about to turn around. I was good at it. Good at reading the flow of a city, at understanding where growth would happen next. My real estate portfolio grew quietly, steadily, invisibly, and I watched Victoria, always watching. I knew when Montgomery Holdings secured a new contract, when they lost a major client, when Trevor screwed up a merger negotiation, when Diane's marketing campaign flopped spectacularly. I tracked everything from a distance, building a complete picture of a company that was slowly, steadily declining under Victoria's leadership. She was good at appearances, excellent at them. She threw the right parties, sat on the right boards, donated to the right charities. But the actual business side? She was letting it rot from the inside. My father had built Montgomery Holdings on innovation and relationships. Victoria ran it on prestige and pride. One of those is sustainable. The other is a house of cards waiting for wind. I graduated college with a 4.0, a dual degree in business and finance, and a growing empire Victoria knew nothing about. I could have reached out then, could have used my father's old contacts, the ones who remembered me as a bright little girl with her mother's eyes, to establish myself in their circles. I didn't. I stayed patient, stayed hidden, because timing, I'd learned, was everything. The turning point came on a Wednesday evening in June. I was 27 years old, owner of 14 restaurants and 12 commercial properties, and I was having dinner at my flagship location, the Italian place that had started it all, still running under Romano's name as a tribute to the man who'd given me my chance. Victoria walked in with Diane and Trevor. They didn't have a reservation, which immediately annoyed the host, but they were important people, or thought they were, and the dining room was mostly full. I watched from my corner, table, as they were seated at a less than ideal spot near the kitchen doors. I could have intervened, could have had them moved. Instead, I watched the situation unfold with the cold curiosity of a scientist observing an experiment. Trevor snapped his fingers at the server, a young woman named Amy I'd hired 3 months ago, putting herself through nursing school. "This table is unacceptable. Move us. Now." Amy, to her credit, stayed professional. "I'm so sorry, sir, but we're fully booked tonight. This is all we have available." "Do you know who we are?" Diane asked, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who's never been told no in her life. "I'm afraid I don't," Amy said, and I could see her fighting to keep her smile in place. Victoria stood up. "This is ridiculous. I'm Victoria Montgomery, of Montgomery Holdings. We're important clients. I demand to speak to the owner." The dining room had gone quiet. Other diners were watching. This was the moment I'd been training my staff for without them knowing it. How to handle difficult customers with grace, how to de-escalate without surrendering dignity. Amy didn't flinch. "I'll get the manager for you." She walked toward my table. I set down my wine glass. "That's them?" I asked quietly. "Yes, Miss Montgomery. Should I?" "No, I'll handle it." I stood up, smoothed down my dress, nothing fancy, just a simple black sheath that I could work in, and walked over to their table. Victoria saw me first. Her face cycled through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been fear before settling on disdain. "Lana, you still work here?" "I own it," I said simply, "and I hear there's a problem with your table." The silence was beautiful. Trevor's mouth actually fell open. Diane looked like I'd slapped her. Victoria's face went through several interesting colour changes. "You own it?" Victoria repeated, as if the words didn't make sense in that order. "Romano sold it to me 8 years ago. I've been running it since." I looked at their table. Ahella's the placement they had been so offended by. "This is actually one of our best tables. Closest to the kitchen means freshest food, quickest service. But if you're not comfortable here, I understand. We're fully booked tonight, as Amy mentioned, so I'm afraid I can't offer you alternative seating. I can, however, recommend several excellent restaurants nearby if you'd prefer to dine elsewhere." It was petty. I knew it was petty. But God, it felt good. Victoria gathered her purse with shaking hands. This is unacceptable. We'll take our business elsewhere." "Of course, that's your right." I smiled the way Mr. Romano taught me, warm but professional, friendly but firm. Though I should mention I own Rustico down the street, and Meridian on 5th, and the Gilt Fork in the business district. If you've been there recently, you've been dining in my establishments, just so you know. Trevor made a sound like he was choking. Diane had gone pale. Victoria just stared at me. "How?" she finally asked. "How did you—" "Hard work," I said. "The kind you learn when someone throws you out with nothing, and you have to build from the ground up. The kind you learn when you understand that real power isn't given, it's earned. The kind you learn when you stop waiting for justice and start creating it yourself." They left. They left my restaurant, got into their expensive car, and drove away into the night. And I went back to my table, finished my wine, and made a phone call to my lawyer. "David, it's time. I want to buy Montgomery Holdings." Victoria's company was in worse shape than I'd thought. My forensic accountant spent 3 weeks going through everything we could access publicly, and the picture that emerged was damning. Years of mismanagement, poor investments, bloated overhead, contracts that heavily favoured partners over the company itself. Montgomery Holdings was hemorrhaging money, disguised by careful accounting and Victoria's reputation. They needed an infusion of capital, badly. They'd been putting out feelers for investors for months, quietly, trying not to let word spread that they were in trouble. I reached out through an investment firm, using a corporate structure that wouldn't immediately trace back to me. I offered exactly what they needed, enough money to save the company, but with conditions. Standard conditions for this kind of investment, my lawyers assured them. Board seats, audit rights, some say in major decisions. Victoria agreed because she had no choice. She thought she was getting an anonymous investor who would pump money into her sinking ship and let her keep steering it. She had no idea she was handing me the keys to her kingdom. The board meeting, where I revealed myself, was scheduled for a Monday morning. I arrived early, sat up at the head of the table and waited. My lawyers flanked me. My CFO sat to my right, a brilliant woman named Janet I'd poached from a Fortune 500 company with the promise of building something real. My head of operations sat to my left. We were ready. Victoria walked in first, confident, expecting to meet with her new investor. She saw me and stopped cold. "Lana, what are you doing here?" "I'm your new investor," I said calmly. "I'm your new majority shareholder, actually, and I'm here to discuss some significant changes to the company my father built." Trevor came in next, then Diane, then the 3 other board members, all Victoria's people, all about to find out their world had shifted on its axis. "This is insane," Trevor said, dropping into a chair. You don't have that kind of money." "I do, actually." I slid folders across the table to each of them. Financial statements, business holdings, property portfolios, all verified and audited. I own 14 restaurants generating approximately $40 million in annual revenue. I own 23 commercial properties, currently valued at just over $200 million. I have investments in 18 other businesses, and I've just purchased a controlling interest in Montgomery Holdings for $60 million. The numbers hit them like physical blows. Diane was shaking her head like she could will this away. Victoria's hands gripped the table edge, knuckles white. "How?" Victoria whispered. "How did you do this?" "I worked," I said simply. "Every day for 10 years I worked. While you were spending money, I was earning it. While you were playing at business, I was building one. While you forgot I existed, I was becoming someone you couldn't afford to ignore." "This isn't over," Victoria said, her voice hard. "I'll fight you. I'll sue. You'll what?" I leaned forward. "Contest a legal stock purchase. Challenge financials that 3 separate firms have audited. Fight me in court with what money exactly? Because I've been through your books, Victoria. Montgomery Holdings is broke. You've been operating at a loss for 3 years, covering it with creative accounting and loans against assets you don't actually own. You're 2 quarters from bankruptcy. The only reason this company still exists is because I bought it." The truth settled over the room like the snow, cold and smothering. "So, here's what's going to happen," I continued. "I'm taking over as CEO. Trevor, you're moving to a consultant position. I'll honour your current salary for 6 months while you look for other opportunities. Diane, same deal. Victoria, you're being removed from the board entirely. You'll receive a severance package, generous, actually, more than you deserve, and then you're done. You'll have no connection to Montgomery Holdings, no claim to the company my parents built." "You can't do this," Victoria said, but her voice had no strength in it. She knew. She knew I could, and I was. "I can. I have. It's already done." I stood up. You spent 10 years teaching me that the world doesn't care about fairness, that power is the only thing that matters, that family means nothing compared to money. You taught me those lessons very well, Victoria. Be proud. You created exactly what you tried to destroy. I walked out of that boardroom and didn't look back. Taking over Montgomery Holdings was like performing surgery on a patient who'd been slowly poisoned. The first 6 months were brutal. I had to make cuts, staff reductions, contract cancellations, office relocations. I hated it. Hated being the person who brought bad news to people who'd done nothing wrong except work for incompetent leadership. But I made those cuts fairly. I gave severance packages. I provided job placement assistance. I made sure that every person who lost their job because of Victoria's mismanagement walked away with dignity and support. Some of them I even hired into my restaurant business, where we were always growing, always needing good people. I restructured debt, renegotiated contracts, brought in new leadership at every level. I took the company back to its roots, my father's vision of innovation combined with my mother's emphasis on relationships and trust. I reached out to old clients who'd left during Victoria's tenure, rebuilt those bridges, proved that Montgomery Holdings could be what it once was. The business press noticed. I started getting interview requests, profile pieces, invitations to speak at conferences. The story was too good to ignore. Young woman builds an empire from nothing, saves her father's company from ruin, becomes a major player in 3 different industries before she's 30. I accepted some of the attention, carefully. I told my story, the parts that mattered anyway. The waitressing, the business school, the hard work. I didn't trash Victoria publicly. I didn't have to. The numbers told that story all by themselves. Victoria tried to fight back at first. She gave interviews claiming I'd manipulated her, stolen the company, destroyed her family. But the facts didn't support her version. I had documentation of everything. Every decision she'd made, every asset she'd stripped, every way she'd run the company into the ground. Her accusations evaporated under the weight of evidence. Diane and Trevor both found other jobs, though not at the level they'd enjoyed before. I heard through the grapevine that they blamed me, told anyone who would listen that I'd destroyed their lives. I didn't engage. Their lives had been built on what they'd taken from me. I'd simply taken it back. 2 years after I took over Montgomery Holdings, I hosted a charity gala. It was for a foundation I'd started, providing business loans and mentorship to young people who'd aged out of foster care or been kicked out by their families. Kids like I'd been, thrown into the world too early, expected to fail. The gala was held at my flagship restaurant, the one that started everything. We'd expanded it, renovated it, made it beautiful. The same dining room where Victoria had once thrown a fit about her table now hosted 500 people dressed in their finest, writing checks to help kids most of them would never meet. I wore my mother's jewellery, the pieces I'd eventually tracked down at various pawn shops and estate sales after Victoria had sold them off. It had taken years and cost more than they were probably worth, but I didn't care. Having them back, wearing them, felt like having a piece of my mother with me. I was standing near the bar when I saw her. Victoria at the edge of the room, not dressed for the event, just standing there watching. Security should have stopped her, but they'd probably let her in thinking she was another guest. I walked over. We stood there for a moment. 2 women who'd destroyed and remade each other in different ways. "You won," Victoria said finally. It wasn't a question. "I survived," I corrected. "That's not the same thing." "Your father would be proud." She said it, bitterly, like the words hurt coming out. "Maybe. Or maybe he'd be ashamed that it took his death for someone to run his company properly." I looked at her, really looked at her. She seemed smaller than I remembered, older, tired. "Why are you here, Victoria?" "I wanted to see it, what you built, what you became." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "I thought I was teaching you to know your place, to understand that people like you don't get to have what people like us have. People like me? Weak, sentimental, soft. She shook her head. But you weren't weak. You were just quiet, watching, learning. And I was too busy congratulating myself on destroying you to notice you were building something I could never touch. Is this an apology? I asked, genuinely curious. No, I don't apologize. I did what I thought was right at the time. She met my eyes. But I am aware that I was wrong about you, for what that's worth. It's worth very little, I said honestly, but it's worth something. At least you can see it now. She nodded, turned to leave, then paused. That trust fund I voided. The one from your father. I still have the paperwork. If you wanted to pursue it legally, I don't need it, I said. I never did. That's what you never understood, Victoria. I didn't need your money or your approval or your family. I just needed you to get out of my way. She left then, disappeared back into whatever life she'd built from the rubble of her mistakes. I watched her go and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not awe, not anger, not even pity. Just emptiness where she used to live in my head. I went back to the gala, to the people celebrating the work we were doing, the lives we were changing. This was what mattered now. Not revenge, not proving anything to people who'd never understand anyway. Just building something real, something good, something that would outlast all of us. 5 years later, I'm sitting in my office, my father's old office, restored to how it looked when he was alive, before Victoria stripped it of everything that made it his. His desk, his books, his picture of my mother on the shelf. Montgomery Holdings is thriving. We've expanded into new markets, acquired 3 competitors, become an industry leader. My restaurants have grown to 27 locations across 6 states. My real estate portfolio is substantial enough that I've hired a dedicated team just to manage it. The foundation has helped over 2,000 young people start businesses, go to college, build lives. I'm 32 years old. I'm successful by any measure. I have everything I was told I couldn't have, everything that was taken from me, everything I built myself from nothing. And yet, sometimes I think about that night in the driveway, surrounded by boxes of my life, watching Victoria close the door on me. I think about how afraid I was, how lost, how certain that I would fail. I think about the girl I was and the woman I became, and how they're the same person, but also completely different. People ask me sometimes if I hate Victoria, if I wake up every day thinking about revenge, about how I destroyed her the way she tried to destroy me. The answer is simpler and more complicated than that. I didn't destroy Victoria. She destroyed herself with her greed, her cruelty, her short-sightedness. I just refused to be collateral damage in her self-destruction. I didn't win because I beat her. I won because I outlasted her, outworked her, outgrew her. My victory was never about revenge. It was about becoming someone she couldn't touch, couldn't diminish, couldn't erase. It was about building a life so complete, so full, so entirely mine that nothing she'd taken from me mattered anymore. I didn't destroy them. I outgrew them. And now, sitting here at my father's office, wearing my mother's jewellery, running the company they built together, I understand something I couldn't have known at 18. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful, so powerful, so untouchable that the people who hurt you become footnotes in your story instead of chapters. They abandoned me for working as a waitress, not realising I owned every branch they dined in. They threw me away, thinking I was nothing, not seeing that I was everything they'd never be. Patient, strategic, strong enough to build, instead of just taking. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their apology. I didn't even need their downfall, though I got that anyway as a side effect of their own choices. What I needed was to become untouchable. And now I am. That's not revenge. That's rebirth. And it's so much better.